Okay. Hopefully my wig doesn't look like a complete mess. Well, it finally happened. After literal years of planning and preparation, Battle Road 2025, the 250th anniversary of the outbreak of the American War of Independence, is over. Come and gone. I'm still trying to process everything that happened, but I don't think it's too much of an exaggeration to say that this was an event like nothing else I've ever experienced in my 10 years of reenacting. This was a truly momentous occasion, not just for the significance of what it represents nationally, but because of the sheer scope of it and the amount of coordination required to put it together. This was a collaborative effort in every sense of the word, between town committees, national park staff, emergency staff, reenacting unit commanders, tour guides, independent volunteers, and probably a whole bunch of other people I'm forgetting to mention. Suffice it to say, there were a lot of moving parts, and as with anything that requires a lot of moving parts, the more parts you introduce, the greater the chances of something not going to plan. I don't think I speak for myself when I say that I had a lot of nervous anticipation about how this event was going to go. So now that the event is in the rearview mirror, how did it go? Okay, I won't keep you in suspense like that. The event was great. In fact, I think it went about as smoothly as it could have gone. There were definitely some last-minute hurdles regarding the parking situation and the heat, with the temperature on the day being in the 80s with high humidity, but neither of those issues were the fault of the park staff, and they dealt with them expertly given the circumstances. The event was billed in the weeks leading up to it as the largest, most historically accurate experience of Patriots' Day weekend, and I think it lived up to that title. And this is all thanks in no small part due to the efforts of the Minuteman National Historical Park staff who organized it. Battle Road, for those who don't know, is a yearly event that commemorates the action that took place on April 19, 1775, in which a column of 600 British regulars under command of Francis Smith were sent on an expedition to Concord, Massachusetts, 18 miles outside of Boston, to locate and destroy a cache of weapons, which were supposedly illegally stockpiled there. Along the way, a skirmish ensued with a group of militia in nearby Lexington, in which 8 colonials were killed and 10 more wounded. The column continued on to its initial objective, was met with resistance on Old North Bridge in Concord upon entering the town, where another sharp skirmish ensued in which the regulars retreated and were then forced to fight a running battle all the way back to Boston. At the end of the day, 273 British soldiers and 95 colonial militia would be killed, wounded, or missing. The Battle Road Trail represents a 5-mile portion of the original route that the British column fought along, resting perfectly preserved within the bounds of Minuteman National Historical Park, which organizes the event, which, as I mentioned, occurs every year, although it is usually not quite as large as it was this year. Planning for this year's event started roughly 5 years ago when the park began a soft rollout of new authenticity standards that participants would need to adhere to in order to attend the 250th. Under these guidelines, all clothing worn by participants would need to be made with materials, style, fit, and construction specifically appropriate for New England in 1775. For most reenactors who attend the event regularly, these standards were not particularly difficult to meet, and the most they would need to do in order to be in compliance, if they weren't already, would be minor tweaks like adjusting the fit of their clothing, swapping linen small clothes for wool, or eliminating small but obvious anachronisms like wool covers on canteens. For my unit, the 40th, it was a bit of a different story because our main impression is geared towards portraying the light infantry company of the 40th Regiment of Foot as they would have appeared during the Philadelphia campaign of 1777, which is the kit that you've seen me wear countless times in previous videos. This kit that I'm wearing right now is how the 40th likely would have looked in 1775, and as you can see, it's entirely different and consists of a leather helmet in place of a felted round hat, a horsehair neck stock in place of a linen roller, a coat and separate red waistcoat in place of a sleeved waistcoat, wool breeches rather than linen trousers, and half gaiters, which in this case are a separate garment rather than being integrated into the trousers. Pretty much the only two pieces of kit that have transferred over from the 1777 kit are the shirt and shoes. Everything else is different. Suffice it to say, putting this kit together was a monumental effort, both in terms of research required to make it as accurate as possible, and in terms of the physical amount of man-hours needed to put it together. So when I say that Battle Road was truly a collaborative effort, that applies to this kit as well. Nearly every one of the several dedicated tailors and other assorted makers in the unit had a hand in constructing at least one of the items that you see me wearing right now. I did a bulk of the sewing on the waistcoat and the breeches myself, but the rest would not have been possible without them. So, to all of my fellow 40th members who might be watching this, thank you all. You're amazing. So in a way, my Battle Road 250th journey really began in January of last year, because that is when I started constructing the breeches. It was a significant undertaking for me because it was the first serious sewing project I had ever attempted. I had done some basic sewing before, but only for things like patching rips and tears on my trousers or sewing an occasional loose button back on. Previously, I had not attempted to sew anything more complicated than a haversack, so going from that to a pair of breeches was quite the jump. And I was definitely more than a little worried about how they were going to hold up, because the event would be the first time I had seriously worn them for any length of time. But I'm pleased to report that they held up well, so I guess I did okay. In terms of other smaller alterations to my kit, one other thing that I did in preparation for this event was to have my musket re-engraved. Previously, the lock on my musket was engraved with the word Tower, which historically would have indicated that it was assembled and inspected at the Tower of London. But given that the 40th was stationed in Ireland just prior to the war, it's more likely that they would have been equipped with muskets inspected in Dublin, so I had the lock re-engraved with Dublin Castle in order to better reflect that. I also had the barrel engraved with 40th Regiment of Foot, and had the escutcheon plate engraved with my rack number. These are small details that will likely go unnoticed by most of the public, but they do make the impression feel more complete, if any impression can truly be referred to as such. Sometimes it's not about what the public sees, it's about how it makes you feel. Which is a nice segue, actually, because there was a lot more happening behind the scenes at this year's Battle Road than I think a lot of the public realizes. And by that I'm referring to the overnight march portion of the event. See, the Battle Road reenactment usually starts around 1 p.m. in the afternoon, to be roughly in line with the time of day at which the historical action would have occurred. But the British troops began assembling on Boston Common at 10 p.m. on April 19th, and commenced their march from Lechmere Point in Cambridge around 2 a.m. on the 19th, after ferrying across the Charles River. So every year before the reenactment, there's a small but dedicated contingent of reenactors that not only participate in the Battle Road reenactment, but actually recreates the entire British march from Boston to Lexington, where they participate in that town's separate commemoration of the events that transpired there, then onwards to Concord, and then back down the Battle Road Trail, ending at the site known as Bloody Bluff, which borders the edge of the park. So although the section of the trail that the reenactment takes place on is only about 3 miles, by the time they reach that point, they have already marched about 18 miles and end the day having marched roughly 24 miles. Like the main event, this happens every year, but even though I have participated in Battle Road several times, both as a regular and as a colonial, I had never partaken in the overnight march before, and likely would not have done so for this year either, were it not for the fact that the participant parking at the registration site was extremely limited. Due to anticipating a higher than usual number of spectators, the park had moved participant parking from its usual location to a different, smaller location that required carpooling in order to accommodate everyone. On top of that, Route 2A, which runs parallel to the park, would be closed through most of the day, and nobody would be admitted through without a special pass. So we all collectively decided it would be beneficial to get to the site as early as possible in order to beat the crowds and the road closures. And if we were going to be there early anyway, we might as well do the march. Or at least part of it. Although part of the column did recreate the entire length of the march from Cambridge, we got up around 1 a.m. after staying up working on last-minute kit alterations until 10 p.m. and drove to the registration area, where we boarded a bus which took us to the staging area for the Lexington Green reenactment at the Church of St. Bridget, just down the road from the Green. But we couldn't just walk down the road to the Green because we would be approaching it from the wrong direction. So in order to make it look like we were coming from the direction of Boston, we had to use the back roads to loop back around to a rendezvous point about a mile down the road at the police station, where we eventually met up with the rest of the column coming from Cambridge. At about 5:30, we marched out, heading west on Massachusetts Avenue towards the Green. If you've seen footage of that particular event before, you'll know that it is probably one of the most chaotic events that we as Revolutionary War reenactors do, on account of everyone firing over each other while being out of ranks with bayonets fixed. For this reason, they make it a rule that in order to fire on the Green, you need to attend a dress rehearsal a few weeks beforehand, which none of us in the 40th were able to do because our kits were not yet complete at that point. So we were not actually on the Green when the firing started. We were a few hundred feet back down the road near Buckman Tavern with the rest of the support column, and we marched through after the main body had moved on. But we did get a front row seat to watch the chaos unfold. Now, historically, Smith's column was around 700 strong, so not all of them would have been on the Green at the same time. Some of them would have still likely been marching in when the shooting started. So you can sort of imagine being a British soldier towards the rear of the column and not necessarily being able to see the militia, but being able to hear your officers shouting and then hearing the shots and the screaming and knowing that all hell is breaking loose in front of you and you can't do anything about it. That's pretty much the situation that we were in. We could hear the shouts, and then somebody fired a shot from the second floor of the tavern just off to our right, and we could see the musket smoke as it quickly enveloped the whole field, and all we could do was look on as our officers urged us to be calm. When the smoke finally cleared, we continued our march over the Green, past the bodies of the militia who lay as they fell. It was a sobering moment. From this point forward, I'm mostly going to be moving on to talking about the actual Battle Road portion of the day, but before I do, I just wanted to quickly give a thanks to the people of Lexington and the event organizers who put this vignette together. I know it happens every year, but they really pulled out all of the stops this year. The whole thing was remarkably well coordinated, and they should be immensely proud. After a brief respite back at the staging area, we continued westward along Massachusetts Avenue for another mile or so before reaching the Battle Road trailhead. By this point, it was 7:30 in the morning, and we were mostly still in pretty high spirits. The march would continue for another 6 miles. It was fairly easy going, as the terrain along the trail is mostly pretty flat. But as the morning progressed, the temperature started to climb. We took frequent breaks to drink water and mingle with the public who had already started to congregate to watch us on our march. In fact, it was during one of these interludes that I met up with a familiar face, Mr. Brandon F., who had come to take pictures. Our march ended back at the registration site at the Noah Brooks Tavern, just over the Concord town line, about a quarter mile down the road from the western side of the park. By this point, it was 10 o'clock in the morning. The temperature was approaching 80 degrees, and we were all feeling the pain, thanks in no small part to our wigs and our leather helmets. I can only imagine how the rest of the column that actually did the full march from Cambridge felt. Thankfully, we had a few hours to rest and recuperate before forming up again for the main Battle Road event around 1 o'clock. At around 12:40, we marched out and went back up the way we came, up Route 2A, back towards the park, and onto a side street called Old Bedford Road, which is actually a private road with a few residences along it, and not actually part of the Battle Road Trail, and therefore not open to the public. This is where the event started to diverge from prior years I had done it, because usually we start the scenario a bit further up the trail, closer to Hartwell Tavern. This year, no sooner did we get off of the main road, we started taking fire from the wood line. Immediately, our company, along with the light company of the 4th Regiment of Foot, were detached to meet the militia and divert their attention from the main column, just as the light infantry would have done 250 years ago. At this point of the scenario, the militia were in a gully while we were at the top of a wooded hill. We deployed in skirmish formation and began to open fire in their direction, but never stayed in one spot for too long because they kept attempting to flank around us up the side of the hill, forcing us to reposition and deny them the flank, all while trying not to slip on the branches, stones, and patches of wet leaves that littered the hillside. This was a real treat for us because, again, at this stage in the scenario, we were not yet in view of the public. This felt very much like an experience that was tailor-made for us specifically. Pretty soon, though, we exited the wood line and turned east towards the approach to Hartwell Tavern, which rests in the middle of an open field crisscrossed with dirt paths lined on either side by stone walls, which we had to vault over, then dart across to the next wall, take a knee, prime and load, fire, then vault over again. It was a real endurance test, one that we all pretty much failed. If you look at videos of this part of the event from prior years, you'll notice that we're usually full of energy at this stage, and we're sprinting from cover to cover with ease. Not so this year. The sleep deprivation from having been up since 1 a.m., combined with the 7 miles of marching earlier that morning, and the heat, which at this point was almost certainly well into the 80s, really burned us out in a big way. We had been able to conserve our energy during the march by pacing our steps at a steady 60 beats per minute, but now that we were having to sprint everywhere, it was proving to be a struggle, and the best most of us could manage was a light jog. My file partner was in a bad way due to having sustained an injury to his toe the day before, so we had to contend with that as well, and he would actually have to tap out once we reached Hartwell Tavern. At Hartwell, the rebels were now firing on us from two sides, and so once again we were deployed as flankers to push the rebels away from the column. Here we found a bit of a second wind and were able to muster up a cheer as we vaulted over the next set of stone walls and formed a defensive line at the far side of the field. It was short-lived, however, as pretty soon we were entering the woods again and hiking up the side of a hill towards the Smith House. Fortunately, this is where the first scenario of the day ended, and we had a 20-minute recess to gather our strength, clean our muskets, and refill our canteens from the water spigots that the Park Service had very graciously set up. Pretty soon we were on the march again, though, heading towards the site of our next scenario, Parker's Revenge. This is the site where John Parker, the same John Parker who led the militia earlier that day at Lexington, got to give the Redcoats a taste of their own medicine. Now, for this scenario, rather than being deployed as flankers, we would instead be acting as a rear guard, protecting the column from any rebels trying to sneak up on them. Here is where we had one of the most memorable experiences of the day. As we approached the site of the Josiah Nelson House, we split off from the main road and took a side path leading to a small clearing in front of the visitor center parking lot, where a set of bleachers had been erected. The entire lot was crowded with spectators. We took a knee here for a while, facing the wood line, while we waited for the rebels to show up. When they did, we gave them a customary light of tree greeting of independent fire by files, where each man works with their file partner as an autonomous unit by taking turns firing, with one of them covering the other while the other reloads. We each fired 2, maybe 3 shots before the order was given to spring up, about face, and sprint to catch up with the rest of the column. As we did so, a cheer rose from the crowd, and we were all momentarily confused because we thought the crowd was cheering for us. It wasn't until we looked over our shoulders that we realized that the rebels, who had been waiting just at the edge of the wood line, were now charging out of the woods directly towards us. We ran as fast as we could away from there, which wasn't very fast. By this point, we were all feeling the pain. We hadn't even made it to the Parker's Revenge site yet, and my canteen was already so low that I was spitting out flakes of rust with every sip of water. My musket, which had been giving me problems throughout the day, was rendered basically unusable by the humidity, and we scarcely stopped moving long enough for me to even attempt to fix it. We jogged straight past the Parker's Revenge site without hardly firing a shot, then vaulted over yet another stone wall, jogged through a field behind the Jacob Whittemore house, and finally entered the homestretch, the field at the base of the hill known as Bloody Bluff, where historically the rearguard of the British column mounted a valiant defense against the rebels before falling back into Lexington, where they would finally be reinforced by a relief column of 1,000 troops led by Lord Percy. Our company went prone at the base of the stone wall at the foot of the hill, and here a sustained firefight took place with the rebels on the other side of the field, who were now massing together in great numbers. At this point, my canteen was completely empty, and I was teetering on the edge of heat exhaustion, so I fell out of ranks and slumped against a tree behind the firing line, too tired to move. As I watched the chaos unfold, all I could think about at that moment was what the soldiers in 1775 who fought over that same ground had to contend with. Because everything that I was feeling at that moment, the sleep deprivation, the sore feet, the exhaustion, the dehydration, they experienced those same sensations tenfold. To think, our march to Concord earlier that morning had ended essentially on the town line. We didn't even make it as far as Old North Bridge at the center of town, or to Barrett's Farm even further out, which is where some of the companies ended up, since that was one of the locations where arms were supposedly being stockpiled, which was the entire reason they were there in the first place. Not to mention, our scenario ended right there at Bloody Bluff. The actual fighting on April 19th, 1775 continued all the way back to Boston through Monotony, where the worst of the fighting was yet to come. Bloody, hand-to-hand fighting with bayonets. Although this is speculation, I often hear it said that if Lord Percy had not arrived with his relief column when he did, that Smith's column would have been wiped out, slaughtered to a man. And if what I experienced last Saturday was even the slightest indication of what they were feeling upon the day of 1775, I don't doubt it for a second. I had the luxury of being able to tap out whenever I felt like it. They didn't. It's mind-boggling what they had to endure. And that's what reenacting is all about at the end of the day for me. It's about trying to gain an understanding, even if it is just a small one, of the hardships that the people who lived through these historic events experienced, and to be able to put myself in their shoes and retrace their steps almost exactly over the same ground 250 years later was an immense honor and a privilege. It was an emotional day for all of us, and I can only hope that at least some of that emotion translated to the spectators who came out to witness the event. If even one person in the crowd came away with a greater appreciation for the people who were affected on that day, then the event, in my opinion, will have been by every measure a success. And none of it would have been possible without the tireless efforts of the National Park Service, who, now more than ever, deserve all of our support. This important milestone in our country's history, unfortunately, falls during a time of great national unrest where our public works, and in particular our national parks, are under threat from the likes of Elon Musk and Doge. In February of this year, approximately 1,000 National Park Service employees were fired illegally as a result of the Trump administration's drastic cutbacks to the federal workforce. This caused a bit of a stir in the reenacting community at the time because there was some concern that the 250th anniversary of Battle Road, after all of the years of planning and preparation, might not actually happen, which of course it did. But nevertheless, in these uncertain times, our national parks need all of the help they can get. So if by chance you're one of the people who came out to watch the event on Saturday, thank you. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope that you will continue to support this event and others like it in the future. And with that, now that everybody is probably rushing to the comments section to call me woke or whatever for going political, it's probably time for me to sign off. But before I go, once again, a huge thank you to everybody who made this truly special 250th event possible. It's surely one that will be talked about for years to come, and here's hoping that all future 250th events can enjoy such a degree of success. Thank you for watching if you made it this far. Leave a like and a comment down below if you enjoyed, let me know, and as always, God save the king.